Well, everyone, we get to talk about the Google Pixel 4a and see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now, what I will definitely tell you is this is one of my favorite phones that Google has ever made. Even though it was a budget phone of 2020, this was at a time where we were coming off pretty much back-to-back flops from Google. We had the Pixel 3 and 3 XL. The 3 was good, but the 3 XL really wasn't that great. But then Google made the Pixel 3a and 3a XL, and those were phenomenal devices for the price tags in my opinion. And then they made the Pixel 4 and 4 XL, which were also kind of a little weird here and there too, and not the best camera setup and everything. So Google took a different approach, and they decided to kind of go full in on their Pixel A series of devices, and they did a tremendous job with the Pixel 4a in my opinion. Now, if you want to pick up the 4a or the 5a, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, on the exterior of the Pixel 4a, what's very interesting is that if you're just looking at this device, it doesn't really look like an extremely old or dated device by any means. This is still a really good looking phone, and this came out in 2020, so it's almost 2 years old. It came out in August of that year, and I remember getting my hands on this thing, and I was actually pretty shocked to see how decent of a feeling phone this was for that price tag. This was not a $1,000 phone, but it could kind of pass off for one, and to be honest, another really interesting thing, just 5 or 6 years ago, having a phone that kind of looks like this back then is actually pretty insane. If you remember like back in 2017, 2016, most of the phones coming out still had home buttons and most of them still had that type of design. So to think that in 2022, we would have phones like this that are considered budget phones are actually, it's actually a pretty interesting thing. Now we have a pretty good 5.8 1-inch OLED display on the front, and it's full HD, it's 1080p. So when I looked at this display when I first got it, I was actually shocked to see how good of a display this was for that price tag. Again, it's not the best display ever. It's really, it's like pretty good for this price tag. There's no 120 Hz, there's no 90 Hz, there's nothing like that. But it's actually a pretty decent display, and I'm actually really happy Google went with this approach rather than putting something like an IPS panel on here or a TFT panel. They actually put an OLED panel, which I'm really, really happy about. We also have a USB Type-C port on this thing and a headphone jack as well, which is another really cool advantage with this type of device. Again, it's not going to be the best, most capable machine with, Samsung DeX or the greatest audio quality from the headphone jack, but it's really cool that we have that type of I/O for this type of budget phone, to be honest. And on the back, we have a plastic back and a plastic frame on this phone. So that's expected in my opinion. I was not expecting to have like a super premium feeling phone, and it does feel cheap compared to a Galaxy S22 or a Pixel 6 or an iPhone 13, but it's not competing with those phones. I think if this were a $500 phone, completely different story. This would not be worth for $500, but for $350, I think when this thing first came out, or even cheaper than that, that is actually a very competitive price for this type of phone, and it's much cheaper than that right now since the Pixel 5a came out as well. So in my opinion, I'm a fan of this type of design, and you have a single camera setup on the back as well, and I think this phone still looks and it does perform pretty well in 2022. Now, another big thing with this phone was the camera quality, so we'll go ahead and hit on that right now. This thing had a single 12.2 megapixel lens on the back, and it was a wide angle lens. Now, we can do 4K at 30 on the back of this phone, which is great. We have optical image stabilization. We have a lot of cool features here. Unfortunately, this phone did not have any 4K at 60, which I think is okay. For this type of device, it would have been cool had we had it, but it's, kind of expected that we don't on a budget phone like this. We had an 8 megapixel front-facing camera as well that can do full HD video, 1080p at 30 frames per second. Now, this camera is not going to win any awards in 2022, but for the price tag of this phone and for the capability behind this machine for it being a brand new phone in 2020, I think it's actually a pretty interesting camera setup. Now, the Pixel 5a is a little bit of a better device because it does have a dual camera setup and it's a bigger phone, and I kind of like that, but with something like the Pixel 4a, I'm still super happy that this device actually had this type of camera setup, and I did compare it against the Pixel 4, I compared it to the Pixel 5, and I compared it to the iPhone at that time too, and it did a pretty good job, and I even think still now it's like a pretty good performing phone when it came down to it. So in terms of the camera setup, I think it's a good camera setup. It's not amazing, it's not the first camera I would pick up, but I'm glad that this thing has this type of camera setup, at least now in 2022. Now moving on to probably one of the best things about the Pixel 4a, that is actually the software updates. So this phone, believe it or not, is going to be supported and has been supported for quite a bit of time, but another cool thing about the Pixel 4a that I've always loved talking about is the stock software and the day one updates. as soon as an update pretty much comes out for this specific device, for any Android phone for the most part, once Google pushes out Android 13 officially, you are going to be able to get this update on this specific device, which in my opinion is one of the best features of this device. Having that type of just, raw updates as soon as an update comes out is really amazing, and I love that more than anything. Again, is it, the main reason to pick up a Pixel device? Well, honestly, it's one of the main reasons. With Samsung's and some other manufacturers, you pretty much have to wait until those manufacturers go ahead and push that update to those devices. But because Google is the source, they're going to be able to pretty much just give you the update they want, and not only, are the updates coming out at a very, very fast, pace, but you're also getting, and this is the craziest thing, you're getting stock software, which in my opinion is my favorite version of Android right now. It used to be Oxygen OS, but that's completely changed now. I think having the stock Android is really nice, and that in my opinion is one of my favorite things about this device as well. So that kind of covers it up in the software standpoint. Now in terms of the performance standpoint, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 730G chipset with 6GB of RAM within it. Now I will tell you, from the performance standpoint, this is still a pretty good performing phone. Now again, it won't be the first phone I would recommend people to buy, but I do think with something like the Pixel 4a, it's in a very interesting spot where this phone isn't massively expensive, it doesn't cost a ton of money to go and pick up, but also, it's still a pretty decent performing phone, and I think that alludes a lot to the software within it. Because this device doesn't have a crazy amount of, background processor or anything, you're pretty much getting a really solid performing device from that standpoint. Now, again, if you're trying to play super heavy intensive games and you're playing like Genshin Impact and all that crazy stuff, you're going to be stuck in a situation where it may not be at the, same caliber that you'd want it to be, but it's totally understandable. This was a, sub $400 phone when it first came out, so I totally understand why the performance won't be at the craziest highest level. But I think now in 2022, it's understandable. It's only gotten better through software updates in my opinion, and I do think if you're somebody who wants to get a, a Google Pixel 4a and use it as a, maybe a year or 2 years or whatever, I think you still have quite a bit of time with this device, and I would say it still gets a thumbs up for me in my books. So in terms of performance, that covers it up there. Now in terms of the actual, now in terms of battery life, this was actually a very interesting thing about this phone. It had a 3140 mAh battery. Now it did have kind of a bit of an underclocked CPU. It wasn't like the best performing phone at that time. So even for this type of, battery life, it was actually pretty good for this device. And again, I'm kind of a fan of it for sure as well. So in terms of everything, and to kind of sum up this whole entire video, I'm going to be honest, I think the Google Pixel 4a is still completely worth it in 2022. I think this is a very solid device for sure. Would it be the first device I would recommend you to pick up? I mean, no, I think the Pixel 6 is a much better device than this thing. I think the Pixel 5 is better than this thing too. But for the price tag and for what this thing was when it first came out, I think it was honestly a very, very good machine. I'm really glad that Google released this type of device, and in so many ways it kind of revived the Pixel lineup in a way. Even though this was the cheapest, device that, Google made at this point, it was actually a really smart move from them because it allowed them to go ahead and pretty much make a device like the Pixel 5 that was, not supposed to be a flagship, but it was a cheaper version of a lot of the phones coming out there as well. And it also allowed them to make phones like the Pixel 6 and differentiate themselves even more with that, Google Tensor chipset. So in my opinion, that's another really cool thing. And when it comes down to it, I will definitely tell you something like the Pixel 5 4a is still completely worth it in 2022. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.